Today I've prepared a very special story for you. Well, I'll explain a bit. I'm trying to improve myself as a creative writer, so I've been doing a lot of stories that usually step out of the bounds that I'm comfortable with. This story is a horror thriller, so I'm not completely comfortable with what I'm doing, but I'm still going to give it a shot. I mean, any practice is beneficial practice. The name of this story is Core Reality O2, Hazak, Gatekeeper of Miasmal. I truly do hope you enjoy. A man wearing a long gray trench coat and black gloves could be seen standing on the outskirts of a town. The place was coated in a dense, unnatural yellow fog that bore an ominous presence. The only visible structure was a church barely standing in the distance. The beautiful stained glass windows that were once used to decorate the church now lie scattered amongst the foggy grass, never to be whole again. In the distance, behind the church to the right, was a village set ablaze by an unknown cause, and to its left, an ominously silent forest looms in the darkness of night, where not even the brilliant moon's light could penetrate it. The man swallowed loudly and loosened his coat just a bit to ease his tension. With it, he began walking towards the church and into the fog cautiously. As his body came into contact with the fog, he found that his eyes were starting to sting a bit, and his visibility worsened. His skin, in direct contact with the fog, began to burn with an agonizing sensation. He quickly covered what he could and put on a pair of goggles that he kept in his left pocket to protect his eyes. With his pain becoming just barely tolerable, he found that something strange was happening with his breathing. His lungs were beginning to burn. Knowing he had no time to waste, he quickly covered his mouth as best as possible and rushed into the church. Approaching, he found that the doors were completely decayed in a single concentrated area. The man cautiously continued. As he entered slowly, he immediately broke out into a cold sweat and became nauseous. His breath hastened, and his lungs filled with even more pain from the fog. At the same time, he could feel vomit suddenly rushing out of his mouth. He shut his eyes briefly in pain, but upon opening them again, he found countless decaying bodies surrounding him. The smell they bore was truly unbearable. He gagged at the sight of them, and swallowed what little vomit would have come up again hesitantly. Slightly weakened by this, he held on to a nearby bench covered in blood and an odd substance. This piqued his interest. Slowly, he raised his hand towards his face to examine the substance now in his glove, and found that it was a type of bacteria capable of rapidly dissolving human flesh, otherwise known as miasma. The man looked back up slowly, and continued heading to the altar of the church in hopes of finding answers to what happened to the town. With each step, the man found himself with no choice but to walk over the deteriorated bodies of the townsfolk. As a result, he found himself making countless unsettling noises, the squashing of exposed internal organs, the crunching of weakened exposed bone, and even the oozing sounds of liquefied mesh that used to be what was a person, kept him in an uneasy state. Drawing near the altar, he found himself unable to bear much more. He halted, standing in a pool of fresh blood and decay. He clenched his fists in pain and sorrow, and as he did, an uneasy surge of shivers raced through his body, causing his hairs to stand. Ultimately, he knew that standing still would only make his surroundings worsen by the second, so he pushed forward. But as he took a step forward, his eyes widened at the sight that shook his very core. He found himself looking into the decaying eyes of a little girl clenching her blood-covered teddy bear. The man noticed that there were signs on her face that she had been crying before she passed. He swiftly aborted his eyes from the sight, but immediately found what could be the girl's decaying parents reaching towards her not much farther away. He stood speechless for a moment. Slowly, he raised his hand towards his goggles to remove them temporarily and wipe away his tears. Without further delay, he continued to the altar. When he arrived, he found a decaying young man, perhaps in his early 20s, holding a journal with a single blood-written word on it: Truth. The man grabbed the journal out of the young man's hands and began to read it from the beginning. He thought, perhaps this journal could hold the truth to what happened here. The man began to read, uninterrupted by the horror surrounding him. In our world exist creatures that outstrip even the boundaries of human imagination. Some seek ruin in order of pushing humanity towards damnation. Others use us as instruments of violence against one another, and arguably the worst of them only see us as playthings. If you told me just a few hours ago that monsters, demons, and gods existed, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have branded you as insane and not given a second thought about it. But now that my eyes are open to the truth, I will share with you my encounter with one of these monsters in hopes that you will learn the truth about humanity's fruitless existence. Exactly 24 hours ago, a young man named Troy, nowhere past his early 20s, could be seen awakening on his bed to an unsettling news report being broadcast on his television. It immediately caught his attention. Welcome back to this breaking news report. Attempting communications with Alistair Town, just east of us in Greensboro, is still ongoing. Travelers coming from that direction claim to have noticed a strange yellow fog coming from the town. Investigations are still going on as the reporter stated, suddenly being interrupted by Troy turning off his television from his bed. He scoffed at the television and headed into his bathroom, connected to his room by a door off in the corner. As he entered, he closed the door behind him. Just as he began to pull down his boxers to relieve himself, his heart suddenly started to race with an unnatural anxiety. His breath hastened, then suddenly staggered. His attention was immediately turned towards the bathroom window, where he gazed into the abyss of a nearby forest. Suddenly, he found his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He broke into a cold sweat and gained a dazed sensation. Something was watching him from deep within the forest. Slowly, Troy began to regain his senses. His trembling hands could be seen moving towards his face, and in that instant, he slapped himself hard. "What the hell am I doing? All this stupid news about nonsense has got me all paranoid," he said, walking towards the bathroom window to shut it forcefully. Afterwards, he went back to the toilet to urinate and prepare for the day. After about half an hour, he emerged from the bathroom fully clothed in a type of school uniform. To his surprise, he noticed his little sister Amanda playing on his bed with her fluffy teddy bear. She quickly noticed him and hugged her teddy bear tightly. As she did, she turned her head to the side ever so slightly and adorably asked her big brother, "Why are you always so late for school, big brother? Are you that much of a glutton for trouble?" He approached his computer desk near the door and grabbed his book bag. Slowly, he turned towards his younger sister and rubbed her head, smiling. "Yeah, I guess you could say something like that. Oh, and for the record, I'm usually only late to first period. It's no big deal," Troy stated, leaving his younger sister in his room and heading downstairs. The ground floor of his parents' house was decorated in abundance of a religious figure known as Dadex. The figures ranged from portraits to miniature statues. He approached the closest statue and kneeled down in front of it to stare it in the eyes. He soon thought to himself, in ancient scripts, records recognized Dadex as a god of benevolence. It said that during a time known as Ragnarok, many godly creatures dormant in the earth and even some from off this world surfaced and fought for dominance. Those so-called gods scorched, drowned, plagued, and even blighted the lands. The holy scriptures of my parents' religion claims that all but one god slaughtered humans like livestock. Its name was Dadex, a creature that walked on 4 legs and bore 4 powerful feather-filled wings. It's claimed that even a single wing beat at its full strength could reverse even the rotation of Earth. And that's the flaw of religion. It's too damn unbelievable. Monsters, gods, and even demons don't exist. It's all just constructs of delusional people's imaginations. I'm not about to waste my time with stupid shit like that. Troy stood, pushing the statue of Dadex back just enough to wobble it. As he did, he noticed his parents in the kitchen during the mandatory morning prayer. Without a second thought, he quickly slipped out of the house undetected and headed to school just a few blocks away. On his left was a beautiful forest known as Acer Woods. It's famous for producing the most delectable fruits ranging from apples to pears. Rumor has it that it's known for producing a golden apple once every spring. To his left was a downward slope view of the supermassive lake known as Otreon. People claim that the lake is bottomless, and within its depths reside a monster capable of controlling any liquid. Directly ahead of him, no more than perhaps 5 blocks away, was one of 3 academies found in Greensboro, Intercell Academy. It also just so happens to be his school. Suddenly, Troy's phone goes off with a text message from his father stating that it was wrong of him to leave without praying first. Troy merely rolled his eyes to it and stated that he prayed before he left his room this morning. Less than a minute later, his father responded by telling him to come straight home after school. Troy assumed that it had something to do with the church and immediately put his phone in his pocket. As he did, he suddenly got a standing cold feeling on the back of his neck. His hair stood, he became staggered and hesitant to take another step. His stomach dropped quickly, it filled with anxiety, and unease overwhelmed him. His heart raced so loudly that he could have sworn he heard it beating loud and clear from the depths of his chest. Suddenly, a cold sweat began to form on his forehead, and quickly it rolled down to his chin where it gathered and dripped slowly. Suddenly, he heard a dark voice coming from behind him. A pale hand could be seen reaching towards Troy's face from behind. "Tell me, boy, what is it you believe in?" The voice stated, casually fading from behind him. Troy noticed that the hand had disappeared as well, and he immediately turned around to find nothing behind him. Troy seemed hesitant to speak at first. I don't believe in anything. Not a god, not a demon, and especially not a monster, he shouted at seemingly nothing. It was then that he noticed a few students walking past him and looking at him as if he were crazy. He paused for a moment in thought. I need to calm down. I'm just hallucinating is all. That voice, that hand, these feelings, none of them are real. I'm not crazy, and shit like monsters and stuff don't exist. If that is what you must tell yourself to keep afloat in this ocean of madness and insanity, then so be it. However, understand that you live in a world plagued with impossibilities. To assume that something is impossible, even when proof of its existence surrounds you, is sheer ignorance, the voice stated with slight hostility. Troy looked for where the source of it was. Driven by pure curiosity, his fear was suppressed, and he found what looked like a fully clothed man sitting atop a garbage can. The man didn't look human to Troy. His body was out of proportion. The man's face was completely backed out by the shade of his hood. Who are you, and why are you telling me this? Troy asked aggressively. The man laughed in amusement of Troy. This merely angered him more, though. Troy shouted, telling the man to shut up and answer his question. Well, since you're going to die soon, I might as well give you what you want. Who am I, you ask? The man said, suddenly disappearing in a dense black haze and teleporting directly in front of Troy's face. He immediately laughed, a wicked laugh, and grabbed Troy's chin, restricting the young man's movements completely somehow. I am a being known as the Reaper. It is my job to collect the souls that manifest in your world in abundance. You, Troy, are one of the many souls I have come to collect today. Luckily, you have nothing to fear from me. I am not the one who will be killing you. That privilege belongs to something else entirely. However, I will be looking forward to seeing how your existence is extinguished, and claiming that very tasty soul you bear, he said, ominously chuckling as he faded away. Troy immediately fell to his knees in a sinking shock. He quickly grabbed his head in pain and tried to shake himself out. That wasn't real. I'm just hallucinating. Yeah, that's all. It's just an hallucination. That expression on those students' faces from earlier. They thought I was crazy because I was talking to myself. If someone else really was there, then they definitely would have freaked out just as well. Or at least they wouldn't have looked at me the way they did. That proves it then. I'm not insane. Slowly, he opened his eyes and noticed that his watch was reading that it was 10 past 8:30. Without further delay, he hurried to school and arrived much later than he expected. As a result, his homeroom teacher forced him to stand outside the class for the remaining 20 minutes of class. As Troy stood there in dead silence and isolation, his mind couldn't help but think of that stranger from earlier. What if that man had some truth to what he was saying? What if monsters and stuff like that really do exist? If they really do exist, then why don't people seem to know about them? Why hasn't humanity made countermeasures for them? I mean, if something as powerful as a god were real, would we as humans even be able to stop such a creature? Wait a second. Could religion somehow factor into all of this? Troy slowly backed up against a nearby locker and slid down it, holding his head trembling. What am I even saying? That shit doesn't exist. It's not real. Nothing about this is real, he shouted, slamming his hand against the ground. Slowly, the only sound that could be heard was the sound of his panting. Soon, an ominous silence filled the empty hallways. Troy lifted his head and noticed the abnormal silence. He stood suddenly and got a strange sensation that he was being watched by something. His heart raced, and he grew increasingly more nervous by the second. Without a moment's hesitation, he checked behind him frantically and found nothing. Looking back in the opposite direction, he noticed an open window at the end of the school's long hallway. The window seemed to be open outwards towards Acer Woods. Troy immediately broke into a cold sweat. As he did, his vision narrowed and blurred around the window. He quickly became dazed and stumbled around as he unconsciously walked towards the window. With his body growing increasingly more weak by the second, he suddenly tripped over himself and slowly lost consciousness. Meanwhile, just outside the window, a pair of glowing, bright yellow eyes could be seen from deep within the opening of Acer Forest. Slowly, An ominous yellow fog is seen emerging from the forest and slowly beginning to leak into the town. Meanwhile, in the depths of Troy's head, he could be seen standing in a pitch-black abyss alone. With a panicked expression, he tried his best to scream, but nothing came out. He begins to hear twisted whispers echoing in the dark abyss. "Enter into madness," it said from behind him. Troy turned to look and found nothing but darkness. Slowly, his panting was the only thing that could be heard in the void. Second by second, his breathing picked up. He quickly began to hyperventilate. Placing his hand over his heart and examining his abnormally high heart rate, he turned around and found himself being stared in the face by a monster that seemed to be decaying. Its bright, yellow eyes filled Troy with fear and forced him to awake screaming. He immediately shot up from the infirmary bed he found himself on. Quickly trying to calm himself, he found that he was in the school's infirmary. However, he was alone. Holding his head down to catch his breath, he looked to his left, out towards the window, and found a bloody handprint on it. He jumped out of his bed in fear and fell to the ground in pain. But as he landed, he suddenly felt a painful stinging on his skin. He looked down and quickly found a dense yellow fog that was hanging low to the ground, but steadily rising. He stood in panic and rushed out of the school's infirmary to a truly maddening sight. He found countless students unmoving on the ground. They were completely engulfed by the fog. He tried to abort his eyes, but before he could, he found that their bodies were slowly being dissolved by the fog. Without a second's hesitation, he shut his eyes and rushed towards the emergency exit of the school. And upon exiting, he found that the town he lived in was in complete disarray. Buildings were on fire, and bodies were laid out on the street being dissolved by the fog, which was even stronger outdoors. His legs grew weak, causing him to stumble around a bit. Troy suddenly fell against the wall and took out his phone to see if anyone tried to get a hold of him. To his surprise, he received countless calls and texts from his family, all telling him to go to the church. With each passing second, Troy became more and more filled with fear. He quickly called his parents, but got no answer. He started to cry and call his little sister, only for her phone to ring for a minute before going to voicemail. Troy immediately threw his phone down and rushed towards the church. As he ran, he passed a few survivors. Many of them were disoriented and vomiting. Some collapsed and died on the spot. However, there was one sight that sent his stomach turning. It was that of a dead infant that had its face crushed by what looked like a grown man's footprint. Troy stopped and immediately fell to his knees, holding his now aching stomach. "I can't take this anymore. It's too much," he cried, ignoring the pain that his skin was enduring from the fog. He held his head tightly and screamed at the top of his lung in sheer agony. As he did, he suddenly got the feeling that he was being watched. He immediately stood in fear and quickly looked around for the source. Slightly in the distance, the sound of another person could be heard screaming. However, it fell short of a complete one. Troy knew somehow that whoever was screaming was now dead. In sheer fear that he would be next, he hurried to the Church of Datex, where his parents said they would be. As he arrived at the front gate, a feeling of hopelessness overcame him. As he looked on, he found that the front gate had been completely trampled over. There were tracks on the ground leading to the church that couldn't have been from a human. Slowly, Troy walked into the church's open doors, hoping that his assumptions weren't correct. However, upon entering, he was met by an ungodly smell of death and decay. With that final sting, he lost all hope. He stumbled towards the altar, and on his way there, he passed what was clearly his decaying parents and sister he loved dearly. As he arrived at the altar, he stood behind it and laughed like a madman. So this is truth. Demons, monsters, and gods, they truly do exist. Tell me, God, why don't you come save your followers? In the very end, they all came flocking to your church in hopes that their so-called God would save them. Ha! There's no point in religion. It's merely something that people use to keep themselves sane in the shit world you created. I'm glad I didn't waste my time with it. Regardless, I'm going to die here. I might as well write down my final thoughts. I just hope that someone comes along and finds them. The truth needs to be known, and people shouldn't have to waste their lives believing in a God that doesn't care about their subjects. he said, sitting down in the fog and writing in a small journal that he kept in his pocket. Meanwhile, just outside the church, a monster wearing a cloak of decaying flesh could be seen approaching. Its body leaked the yellow fog in abundance. Its teeth were jagged, it was skinny, and it reeked unlike anything the world has ever known. Slowly, it opened its double-jawed mouth and stood on its hind legs while it sucked in the surrounding fog. In a matter of seconds, it fired a powerful smoke beam of flesh-eating bacteria into the church. Back in present time, the man could be seen closing the journal. Damn, kid, you are so close to the truth. The real truth is that gods don't stand by and do nothing. Many of them trust in living things to do and solve their own problems. However, when the problem in question becomes so big that living things don't have a chance in hell, they bestow a fraction of their power to an individual they know will solve the issue. With that power, the single person is now capable of dealing with even the worst of monsters and demons. Those individuals are known as cultists. And I just so happen to be the one sent by Deadass. I'm truly sorry that I was late, but I'll ensure you that you have a safe passage to the afterlife. Now, Gatekeeper of Miasmal sin, Hazak, this is where you die. The man stated calmly. Suddenly, he pulled a gun from his pocket and aimed it towards the monster slowly entering the church. Oh boy, that story was such a weird one. I'm not used to making horror stories, but I definitely had a lot of fun doing that. I do have plans to progress this story in the future, but right now I have other stories to work on. If you like this video, then please like, and please tell me what you like in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your feedback. Unfortunately, that's all I have for you today. I really do hope you come back sometime. The library gets rather boring without people to read with. Enjoy your day, and thank you for coming.